What is going on, guys? DragonTamerBlayde here, back with some more Elder Scrolls Legends, and today I'm bringing you something that I've been super excited about. I've kind of kept it under wraps while it's been being worked on. I made my own custom expansion. I'm sure you've seen it either in the Reddit post or wherever you're seeing this video from. I took some time to make myself a card expansion. I think there's about 40, 41 cards or so. And then, before I even get into it, just huge thank you to Zenimax. Some of you guys may see him as High King Emmerich as well. He helped me get the visuals, the names, just all of the things you guys are seeing with the cards. He helped me put them together, as well as bouncing some of my ideas for balance off some of these cards as well. So huge thank you to him. This could not have been done without him. Without him, this would just be a bunch of ideas on a spreadsheet. So we're going to go ahead and go through some of these, and you guys will get some quote-unquote developer commentary on the cards that were created. If you just want to see the cards and you don't want to hear me talk about them, there's an Imgur link in the description. You guys can go just look through the album if you want. But here I'm just going to talk about, some balance considerations, why I wanted an effect in the game, stuff like that. So, like I said, we got about 40 cards or so. Let's hop on into it. First card is Arcanium Elder. 5 cost, 3/5. Your supports are immune. The biggest reason why I want a card like this, as much as it'll probably be frustrating to lose to at times, I think this game desperately needs ways to protect certain supports. You can't build a deck around things like Mushroom Tower or Rothgar Forge. I mean, you can try, but you would pay 7 or 9 Magicka for a support, and your opponent could just drop down Shadowfen Priest or Dushnik Yell Archer or any of the other highly effective low downside support removals in the game, and then you kind of just lost because you wasted a turn with no benefit for you. So something like Arcanium Elder, I kept the stats lower because you're playing this card for the effect, not the body. Made sure it couldn't really be comboed with most of the good supports on the same turn. So it couldn't be played with Mushroom Tower on the same turn without ramp. It could be played with Rothgar Forge on the same turn, but that's less common, and I don't think this card would fit as well in a Rothgar Forge deck. But I think a card like this, or some way to protect supports, was needed. So that's why I went for Arcanium Elder. Next up, we've got Ashlander Plotter, and this actually will bring up the new mechanic that I created for this expansion. It's called Surge. It's kind of similar to Exalt, but for a Surge effect, you have to pay the effect while the card is already on the board, and it can be activated once per turn. So in the case of Ashlander Plotter, you summon it as a 3 cost 3/4, and then once per turn, you can pay 3 Magicka to destroy a wounded enemy creature for Ashlander Plotter. So I compared this to, obviously, Leaf Lurker. It's a 5 cost 4/3. 4/3 is about 3 costs worth of stats. So you're paying 2 extra Magicka for a finish off effect, which is exactly what Leaf Lurker is. So for Surge effects, the way I wanted to balance them was to make them slightly overcosted for what they do. So since a finish off type effect runs you about 2 Magicka in the game, I wanted to up that cost to 3 because it can be activated multiple times, and I don't want Surge to be super oppressive if it doesn't get instantly answered. And also, you're getting this effect on one card, so you don't have to spend multiple cards to make it happen. So I want there to be a premium in terms of paying Magicka for that. So we got Ashlander Plotter, and I think the return of these type of wounded effects mattering would mean that the game is in a more mid-rangey position, and selfishly I would enjoy that quite a bit. Next, we've got Assembled Berserker. I'm a firm believer that Factotum decks are quite on the brink of being quite playable, but also you can't give them too much more or they'll become too good. So I wanted to give them one more that helps in either giving attack or rally, but also the card overall is pretty weak, so it needs the other Factotums even more so than typical in order for this to be functional. Otherwise, you're playing a 4 cost 5/1 or 4 cost 3/1 with rally, which obviously is really, really bad. But if you're playing this in a Factotum deck, I think this could just give it that extra push that it needs for Factotums to become a more consistent and reliable deck. Next up, we've got Beastmaster, 3 cost 4/3. Whenever you summon an animal, draw a random animal from your deck. This is just a way to give animal decks more draw. I'm a fan of tribal type things, and there's not a lot of great ways to draw in animal type decks, so it's just a good way to turn on that synergy. And it's not targeted draw, so you'd be drawing anything from your 1-cost animal to your 10+ cost animal. It's not a way to like cheat out your high cost creatures. I just think this would be a fun tribal pick. Next up, we've got Call Reinforcements. 3-cost action, draw a random guard creature from your deck and give it +2/+2. This is a nod towards Guard Spellsword, which has been, I feel like, pushed for quite a, not fully pushed, but, you know, the cards have been kind of pushing in that direction. It's just never quite had enough to come through. And historically, one of the weaknesses of Spellsword is drawing. But I didn't want to just give it quality, like, draw without limitations. I want it to have to be guard, so it kind of slides into that guard Spellsword or other slower purple deck things. And you're basically paying the 1 extra mana or magicka for a +2/+2 buff, making your wall a little bit more beefy. Next up, we've got Confused Brute, one of my favorite cards in this whole set. It's a 3-cost 5/5 orc. It ignores cover and can only attack creatures in the opposite lane. So the wording of this, I tried to find a way to word it without being too wordy, but Confused Brute cannot go face, and it cannot attack the lane directly in front of it. So if it's in the shadow lane, it can only attack the field lane. If it's in the field lane, it can only attack the shadow lane. And basically, I wanted this to be a high reward, control the board type of card. Yeah, it's just, I like the idea of only being able to attack across lanes. It could be both a benefit and a weakness. Ignoring cover but not being able to go face basically means this card is only existing to trade with creatures, and for that limitation, you want to get extra stats for the cost. Is a 5/5 too much for 3 when you're controlling the board? I don't know, maybe, but I don't think that it would be a bad thing for this game to go back to controlling the board with creatures. Moving on, we've got Deadly Markswoman. 4-cost 3/3 Dark Elf. She cannot gain cover, and whenever an enemy creature gains cover, deal 2 damage to it. So this is the kind of thing where if you're in like a either aggressive or mid-range, either mirror or against another fast or slow deck, normally when you take control of the field lane, if your opponent's trying to kind of beat you down at the end there, or just trying to also race you, they're going to shift to the shadow lane. Deadly Markswoman is one of those cards where it's a little bit understated for the cost, but for the most part, it can kind of shut your opponent out from going shadow lane and trying to sneak the damage through. I just think this would be a really cool card, again, rewarding you for being on the board, and preventing your opponent from just running into the shadow lane to try and sneak the last bit of damage through. Next up, we've got Deafening Mummy, another Surge card. It's a 2-cost 2/3 with Surge 2, silence an enemy creature. We have some 0-cost silence in the game, but overall, silence seems to cost between 0 and 1 magicka. So I figured this, since silence is an incredibly powerful effect, the Surge cost for this one is going to cost 2, since, again, you're saving not having to run extra cards in your deck, and the ability to silence every single turn is very, very strong. So this one is actually even more expensive of a Surge cost than typical. I also wanted to try not to keep Surge costs too low, so that you could just not even have to worry about your hand and just play a bunch of Surges on the board every single turn. It was an interesting balance consideration to make these cards, but I think Deafening Mummy is pretty balanced as a 2-cost 2/3. The body is fine, and being able to silence something every single turn is powerful, but at least in the early game, you'd be spending almost your entire turn silencing things, so I think it kind of evens out. Next up, we've got Dragon Sanctuary. It's an activatable support. You deal 1 damage to a creature for each friendly dragon you control. I don't think this card is that strong, and obviously I don't want the entire expansion just to be ultra powerful cards. That's usually one of my critiques of most people's custom cards, is that every single card is like incredibly powerful. So I wanted some regular cards as well, and this is a regular card, and especially because this is a neutral card. I hate when neutral cards are too strong. So this is just a fine card, I think. Realistically, in Dragon decks, you're never really going to have more than between 2 and 3 creatures on the board. So this is like a crushing blow type of support in the best of situations. However, it can't go face. It just kind of helps you control the board. Dragons can be a little bit slow to get going, so having this down to kind of aid in you taking over the board, I think could be a pretty cool support. Overall, I think this wouldn't even get run in a lot of Dragon decks. But some of them I think it would, and I think it'd be a solid fit in some decks. Next up, we've got Dunmer Strategist, 4-cost 4/3, with the ability choose one. Both players gain +1 magic max magicka, or both players lose -1 max magicka. So this is a kind of cool type of card, and I guess you could run it depending on how your deck played out against your opponents. Like if you know your deck is a slower deck than your opponents, you could do the gain +1 max magicka, or you could de-ramp you and your opponent if you feel like you're a faster deck. I think it's an interesting choice, and it will reward you being able to identify what your opponent's playing early on in the game, or whatever you think would be your best advantage for the game. I think this would be an interesting decision-making type of card to be added. Next up, we've got Empowered Troll. It's another Surge card. It's a 5-cost 4/5 with a ability Surge 3, heal this creature, and then whenever this creature takes damage, it gains +1/+0. So this is another card in like the Frost Troll vein. However, it's not quite as swingy as Frost Troll. However, since this card does have a pretty solid body for the cost, and it'll gain +1 attack every single time it takes damage, the heal cost had to be slightly more expensive so that this card didn't just dominate the entire game as soon as it hit the board if it survived for a turn. I still think this card has the potential to snowball quite a bit, even with things with like Fighters Guild Hall. However, with the Surge costing 3, I think most of the time you're probably not going to want to pay this. But having the ability to heal on command, I think, almost makes this a better Regenerate. Regenerate's such an inconsistent keyword. Being able to swing first and then activate it, I think, is better. It's better than Regenerate. This would make Regenerate more appealing if you could pay to activate Regenerate on command. But again, Regenerate's a very scary keyword in general, so you have to keep that cost up so it doesn't become too oppressive. Next, we've got Fierce Berserker, another Surge card, a 7-cost 7/6 with Breakthrough, and it has Surge 3, battle an enemy creature. I know battle is scary since we're dealing with Squish the Wimpy right now. However, the fact that Fierce Berserker and its Surge effect can only be activated on itself, I think becomes a little bit less scary than Squish the Wimpy in general, since the worst thing that could happen with Fierce Berserker is a breakthrough effect, or just breakthrough damage in general. It's not like it has a crazy slay ability or anything like that. And since Fierce Berserker has 6 health, realistically, it's probably only going to be able to battle once, and if you wanted to battle right away, you're going to be paying 7 magicka for the card and 3 magicka for the ability, so it's like a 10 magicka almost charger. And you compare that to Tazcad, which is like a 9-cost 6/6 with the Last Gasp and Breakthrough. I think this card actually fits the balance pretty well, and uses battle in a way that doesn't feel bad like Squish has felt bad. Next up, we've got Fighters Guild Mentor. I did try to add another group of cards for the guilds. We got, this one is Fighters Guild, it's 4-cost 3/4, with the summon ability, deal 1 damage to a friendly creature, and give it +2/+0. So it's kind of like, I think there's a Hearthstone card that does something similar, but this would really be pushing some of that self-damaging warrior deck, or just self-damaging red in general. This would be a really powerful card in that deck, really swingy card in that deck. I could even see this potentially having lower stats because of how good it could be. But for now, the deck is not that great, and it kind of relies on high rolling. So Fighters Guild Mentor would fit in that deck, and I think in a lot of mid-range and aggressive decks in general. I think a lot of decks would trade 1 damage for 2 extra attack. Next up, we've got Forsworn Witch. I did want to make sure that I had a neutral Surge card in there, and to fit in with the neutral theme, it's kind of understated for the cost, I would say. 3-cost 2/3, again, that's usually 2 magicka worth of stats on a 3-cost, with the ability Surge to give a friendly creature +1/+1. This kind of just shows of my design philosophies of not making neutral creatures too good. However, if there was ever like Reachman synergy, Forsworn Witch would probably fit into that. And I think this could be a decent arena pick. I don't think this would be a constructed type card, but I wanted to make sure that neutral got some love for Surge as well. Next up, we've got Giant's Club, one of my favorite cards in the set, just because I think it's outrageous and fun. It's a 5-cost item, It gives a creature +3/+0 with the summon ability fling a friendly creature at an enemy creature. If it survives, return it to your hand. So I wanted to capture that flavor of like playing Skyrim and you go push the giants and they kind of just fling you into the atmosphere. The way fling would work in this card, it would be basically a battle effect. So you'd spend 5 magicka, you'd equip this to a creature, and it would battle an enemy creature. If your creature survives the battle, then you return your creature to your hand. Giant's Club would go to your discard pile. Again, this is, I think, a feel better type of squish effect. Even if you had the magicka to, say, play this on Night Talonlord, it would be a huge swing, but then Night Talonlord would go back to your hand, and eventually you would have to play that card again. So it would kind of prevent a lot of the cheating scenarios, and this costs a little bit more. I think this is a way to kind of achieve the spirit of Squish without making Squish all over again. And full disclosure, I did have a card. It's funny, I worked on this set before Isle of Madness came out, and I had a card that was almost identical to Squish, but it was an item, and we had it in red. It was a 2-cost item that gave 2 health and had you battle an enemy creature. Obviously, we cut that because I think even Squish is too good. I didn't really envision that at the time, but I also had made this set before Ramp Warrior was all over the place. So it was kind of a hindsight, I learned better type of thing. Next up, we've got Graveyard. This is actually a lane effect that you see in Solo Arena, I think sometimes, as well as possibly in Chaos Arena occasionally. But it's 4-cost support, and it's just for you, however. Whenever a friendly creature not named Rotting Draugr dies, summon a Rotting Draugr. So this would affect both lanes, as opposed to the one lane in the story mode in the Solo Arena. But I wanted a type of thing where I think like Token Spellsword could run this, and it'd be an amazing card in that deck. Being able to have your 1/1s die and leave 1/1s behind just really makes your deck even that more resilient. And paying 4 cost in a aggressive tokens deck, usually you can't really afford to do that much. So I think the cost would make it to where it wouldn't be too good. This is one of those cards that I'd probably want to see play tested, but I think this would be a really fun card to have in the game. Next up, we've got Green Shade Gorilla, 4-cost 2/3 with the summon effect. Trigger the slay effect of a friendly creature. This would be one of those cards I think that may be hard for some newer players to understand. Things like Night Talonlord, its slay effect just wouldn't work with this card because there was no creature that Night Talonlord slayed. But in general, things like your Brotherhood Slayer, your Falkreath Defiler, cards like that, you'd be paying a premium with this card to trigger that slay effect. And that's why the stats are quite bad for a 4-drop, because this card enables a lot of slay synergy. And I think since slay is a really, really powerful keyword in the right situations, I felt like this card needed to be much weaker than a typical 4-drop. Next up, we've got Inspiring Commander. It is a Surge card for Willpower. It's 4-cost 2/3 with the ability Surge 2, summon a 1/1 Imperial Grunt in each lane. So again, we compare this to like Scouting Patrol. It's a 1-cost, basically it's a 1-cost card version of this Surge ability. However, you're also spending a card to do so. So since Inspiring Commander gets it as his ability, you pay 1 extra. This one's more one of the simpler Surge cards, but I wanted to play with the token effects in yellow as well. Next up, we've got Mage's Guild Mentor. So we got another guild card coming in. It's a 4-cost 3/4. And this card has the ability, your actions that deal damage deal 1 extra damage. So your Ice Storm will deal 4 damage to all creatures. Your Lightning Bolt will deal 5 damage to the face. Your Ice Spikes deal 3. It's the type of card that I think Destruction Tutor wanted to enable, but kind of failed to push that type of damage action mage or assassin type of thing. I think Mage Guild Mentor could kind of fill that desired role. Alright, next up, we've got Malevolent Apprentice. It's another Surge card. This one's in blue. 4-cost 3/4 with the ability Surge 3, deal 2 damage to a creature. So it's like a Firebolt on a body. This one costs quite a bit because I was a little bit worried. Originally, I had this as a Surge 2. But then it kind of looked like it was encroaching upon like Icy Shambles, Ash Servant territory. And also, I felt like if this Surge effect was too cheap, then you could get a multiple of these out and kind of just prevent your opponent from ever playing another creature. So I wanted to make this a little bit prohibitive to just completely locking down the board. That's why Surge 3 instead of Surge 2 came through. So it's an overcosted Firebolt, but it would allow you to continue controlling the board without having to lose your creatures. Maybe I made the Surge cost too much on this card, but like I said, I was just worried about locking out the game. Next up, we've got Necrom Recruit. It's an assassin card, 3 cost, 2/2, trigger the last gasp effect of a friendly creature. This is similar to the other card, the Greenshade Gorilla. However, this is a class-specific card, as well as last gasps in this game are not quite as powerful as Slay effects. So this was able to be a 3 cost instead of a 4 cost. The 2/2 body is still because this is a pretty powerful effect. I think just having this would be enough to put Last Gasp Assassin kind of into the forefront as a more viable deck. Right now, the deck kind of struggles because you only have one mass Last Gasp trigger. Having 3 more of these in your deck that can trigger individual Last Gasp, I think would be really, really good. Next up, we've got Necromancer's Altar. It's a 4-cost support. This is purely for graveyard synergy type decks. It's a 3-cost or 3-use support with the ability to activate, discard a creature, and give that creature +2/+2. And finally, since you're discarding 3 cards and spending 4 Magicka over the course of using this card, this support, at the end it has a last gasp of draw a card. That's kind of just to recoup some of the value of how much you're burning through. But at the same time, this could be an incredibly powerful card if you're in a graveyard type deck, and if it becomes a more viable synergy. Getting cards into your graveyard on purpose and buffing them is very, very strong, so I didn't want this to be a very easy and cheap effect. Next up, we've got Orsimer's Mercenary. It's a 3-cost, 3/2 with charge. Compare this to like the Minotaur. It's a 4-cost, 3/2 with charge and breakthrough. Or there's a 3-cost, 2/3 Orc with charge. So since this is one of the best stats on a Chargers we've seen, the summon ability gives your opponent +1 max Magicka. I wanted to play around with different downsides of cards instead of just like paying extra for the charge or any of those type of things. And giving your opponent +1 max Magicka really pushes that risk reward type thing, because now you get to play 3 damage to your opponent's face right away. However, you're giving them extra Magicka if they're a slower deck to get towards their Ice Storm a turn faster. So it's one of those high risk, high reward cards that I wouldn't mind seeing for aggressive decks. Next up, we've got Poisonous Mist. This is another one of my cards that I think is pretty fun. It's kind of similar to, like, let's say Defile in Hearthstone, but for this one, it gives all creatures -1/-1, including friendly creatures, and if any creature dies, this gets casted again. So, if there's a board of tokens, you kill all the 1/1s, and then it's one of those things where it rewards you being able to set this up properly. That's one of the things I really appreciate about Defile in Hearthstone. If you can analyze the board and find a way to set this up to be a clear, it becomes very, very powerful. But unlike the original Drain Vitality and stuff like that, this card has the downside of affecting your own creatures. But it also can act as an upside. If you have a 2-health creature to chain your opponent's 1-health, 3-health, 4-health creatures to your 2-health, now it becomes a board clear. So it's a pro and a con that it affects your own creatures. And it's a curse type effect, so I guess there are combos with, let's say, SharePoint Dragon. This would be 2/2 right off the bat. I don't know. I think this card would be really, really cool to see and fun to play around. Next up, we've got Power Conversion. It's a 4-cost support for Endurance with 3 uses, with the ability, if you end your turn with Magicka remaining, draw a card and consume 1 use. So Magicka remainings would mean if you have 7 total Magicka on your turn, you only spend 6, meaning you have 1 left over at the end of your turn. That would trigger Power Conversion. So it's a way to kind of balance maybe playing a suboptimal Magicka turn in order to get an extra card. And typically, drawing 3 cards costs probably 5-ish Magicka. We don't really have that effect in this game. But drawing 2 cards is about 3 Magicka. So this one is 4 Magicka, plus you have to intentionally not use at least 1 Magicka 3 times. So if you look at it that way, it could be up to a 7 Magicka for 3 cards. However, you're not always going to have a perfect use all of your Magicka type turn. So I think this could be a cool card for certain decks. And it kind of enables passive draw. So it's not like super strong where your opponent gets all 3 cards at once. They have to work for it over the course of a couple turns. I think that kind of balances out the effect quite a bit. Next up, we've got Power Toxin. It's a 1-cost action. Give a creature -1/-1, and lethal. So it can be used as a more expensive curse, but can also be used on your own creatures to give them lethal and trade into something. It's just a really, really flexible card. You can use it as cheap removal on your opponent's creatures, use it on your own cards. I don't know. I like this card quite a bit. I think it fits into a lot of decks. It would be very, very flexible. Pretty simple card overall, though. Next up, we've got Prisoner Exchange, showing some love to some of the slower decks, potentially. It's also a card that you control. So it's a 6-cost action. Each player chooses a friendly creature to give to their opponent. So depending on the way that this works, if your opponent just has one really powerful creature on the board, you can drop down a 1-drop, play this, and you guys are swapping. Obviously, that's a huge swing. However, if your opponent has a 10-drop and 5 1-drops and you play this, they can choose to give you a 1-drop. I think this would lead to a lot of mind games with the board, trying to make sure you have different creatures on the board, not just cheating out one big thing. I think this card could create a lot of really fun head games in certain matchups. Next up, we've got Purge Evil. It's a targeted action. It costs 3. It deals 6 damage to an undead creature, and you gain 4 health. It's kind of similar to, in the vein of Dawnbreaker. Originally, I had this as destroy an undead creature, but that felt a little too strong, so I made it 6 damage so that it kills most cheap undeads in the game. However, some of the more expensive or buffed undead creatures will be able to survive. And then the health is kind of turning their life force into health for you. And also because this card is very specialized, it can only target undead. So to risk or mitigate the risk factor of this being a dead card in some matchups, it has the added upside of health as well. Next up, we've got Redguard Armor. It's a 2-cost item where you choose either +3/+1 or +1/+3. So it's kind of like a sword shield type of thing. You choose if you want this to be an aggressive or a defensive type of item. It's locked into Battle Mage, so it kind of fits that item theme. I like the idea of flexible items that can do multiple things for you. It's one of the reasons why I like Cloak and Dagger so much. Next up, we've got Sacrificial Flame. It's a 5-cost action for intelligence. Deals 1 damage to all enemy creatures. However, it deals 1 extra damage for each creature that dies this turn, or died this turn. So if you have a bunch of smaller creatures that you trade into your opponent's guard, each time one of your creatures dies, or your opponent's creatures, it's going to tick 1 damage onto this Sacrificial Flame. So a lot of the times, this will probably wind up being a slightly worse Ice Storm. However, if you trade one thing in with an opposing creature and they both trade, so both you and your opponent's creatures die, now this becomes a 5-cost Ice Storm. So I think there's a lot of ways where this could end up better than Ice Storm in some scenarios, and then also in some scenarios where this winds up worse. And that's why I like the card, is it's a card that you have to set up for it to be powerful. And it's not going to be powerful in all situations. You have to identify the situation where it's strong and use it well. Next up, we've got Central Looter. It's a 3-cost 3/4, another Surge card. Place a random 0-cost card into your deck, or into your hand. I know a lot of people don't like Surin Pawnbroker. However, you have to pay a total of 5 Magicka just to trigger this effect 1 time. And I really don't think these random 0-cost cards are super problematic. I think they can be really feel bad, and I agree with that. But I wanted to give market decks another thing to kind of thrive on, since market decks have been nerfed into the ground recently. Next up, we've got Shield Warden. It's a willpower. It's a willpower card, 5-cost 5/6 with guard. Surge 2, give a friendly creature guard. This is another kind of nod towards the guard spell sword type of thing. I don't think this card would be super, super strong, but it's got Phalanx Exemplar type stats. And the ability for this one could be even more defensive, since you can keep giving your own creatures guard. Kind of compared it to Stand Watch, which costs 2 and draws a card, and also has Prophecy. This doesn't have Prophecy or Draw, so the cost 2 I think fits pretty well there. Next up, we've got Siege Master, 2-cost 4/2 Orc. Stats are pretty good on this thing for the 2 cost. I kind of compared it to Greystone Ravager, which is a 2-cost 4/1 with Prophecy. This one has no Prophecy, but +1 health. It has the ability Surge 2, give a friendly creature +1/+1 and Breakthrough. This is just like the aggressive snowball card. Paying 2 for +1/+1 and Breakthrough. A lot of the times in really aggressive decks probably isn't going to be good, but it can be good for getting past like Treat Minders and stuff like that and getting some face damage in anyway. I think this card could see play in a fair amount of decks. Not all of them, because technically it's not a super fast 2-drop, but I think it could see play just for the stats alone sometimes. Next, we've got Spiteful Hagraven. So the way this card would work, I'd probably have to change this to have a cost of, let's say, I don't know, make it overcost like 7, and then change the text to something like, you may summon this creature for free by discarding 2 cards, because the way it is now, it could be summoned by conscription, and that's not the goal with this card at all. This card is more of a, you get huge stats for paying a huge price. So instead of paying Magicka for this creature, you'd be paying cards from your hand. So unless you had crappy cards to discard that you don't care about, you'd be paying quite a bit to get out 5/4 worth of stats. I don't think many decks could afford to run this card very well, but some sort of all-in type aggro strategy could potentially run this alongside Crown Quartermasters and then discard a couple daggers and get out a 0-cost 5/4. This card I really just wanted to play around using resources other than Magicka to draw cards, and one of the other most important resources in the game is your cards. So that's why we made Spiteful Hagraven. Next up, we've got Stockpile, showing a little love to item decks. 3-cost action, shuffle all items from your hand into your deck and draw that many cards. So one of the biggest problems with running dedicated item decks and having a lot of items in your deck is you can occasionally draw too many items and your hand is just dead. So Stockpile is a way to kind of work around that, but also realizing that you're going to almost completely reshuffle your hand in some scenarios, so it's as strong as the items you draw. I think it would be a great enabler for items decks. Next up, we've got Sunforge Invoker. It's an 8-cost 5/5, another card for items decks. It costs 1 less for each item in your hand or discard pile. So in an items deck, you could easily get this down to like a 0 or 1 cost just by playing a bunch of items. I think this is the kind of swingy card that an item deck would need. And getting cost reduction for items that you've already gotten use out of, I think is a good way to both set up the pre-Master of Arms play, but also this card gets more expensive after you play Master of Arms because it's only in your hand or discard pile, not in play. I think that was a pretty direct restriction that I wanted to put on the card, so that it had to be an unplayed or already used item, not a win more type of card. Next up, we've got Thieves Guild Mentor. 4-cost 3/4. Friendly Slay abilities are also Pilfer abilities. This is kind of similar to the other card where something like Night Talonlord wouldn't work, but being able to trigger Slay ability going face I think would be incredibly strong, and it would kind of prevent the ability of opposing decks to hide in the other lane from your Slay abilities. They would have to contest you. This card is possibly one of the strongest cards in this set, I think. Might even be too good, but I really wanted to put more love towards Slay type decks because they reward creature trading, and it's a thing that I want to reward. Next up, we've got Tincture Saleswoman, 6-cost 5/6 red guard. She has guard, and she has the ability shuffle a Holy Tincture into your deck, and the Holy Tincture right here, it is an instant cast when draw, so you don't have to pay the cost of the card. The cost is just there if you were to like steal it or something like that. But it gains you 7 health as soon as you draw it. So it's one of the stronger heals in the game, but at the cost of it being delayed and over time. But you also get a defensive guard on your side as well. Next up, we've got Tullius's Captain, 7-cost 5/5 with guard. Whenever you summon a creature with guard, summon a Septum Guardsman in the opposite lane. So this is kind of similar to Legate Ricky, but instead it's going to be with little guard tokens. Costs a little bit more as well. But it's just another one of those guard spell sword type things. And this could even push seeing, is the card Imperial Camp that gives +1 attack to your guards? This guy could fit into a deck like that pretty well, I think. Next up, we've got Vampire Night Stalker, a 5-cost 3/5 with Drain. that has the Slay ability, summon a 2/2 vampire with Drain. So obviously it's a little bit understated for its cost, but it has Drain, so you usually have to sacrifice some stats for Drain, as well as the Slay ability summoning a 2/2 token is pretty strong, and that 2/2 token also has Drain. So this guy can be like a snowbally machine. I want to show a little bit of undead love as well, get a vampire into the set, and I think this is a pretty cool Slay type card. Next up, we've got Wisp, another Surge effect. 1 cost 2/1 with the ability Surge 1, gain a random keyword. It's just a cheap card, kind of similar to it's a 2 cost 2/3, I think, that has Exalt. This guy could trigger himself over and over again every turn. This Surge might need to be 2 costs just because of how snowbally it could be. High rolling ward on turn 2 or something like that could be very, very deadly. But overall, I think I wanted a powerful keyword type synergy card for intelligence decks. But that's it. That's the entire set. Hopefully you guys enjoyed all this. Looking forward to discussing these cards with you guys down below in the comments section. I'll be here to answer any questions, both here or on Reddit. But yeah, thank you guys so much for checking this out. I had so much fun. I'm already looking forward to making another custom expansion soon. So yeah, thank you guys all very much for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.